mare, mare, oiai, cozoti bater, mare, oiai, mare, oiai, mare, oiai, cozoti batera.
Uau! Boa noite a todas e a todos. Sejam todas e todos bem-vindos para esse momento singular para a teologia brasileira. Nós estamos muito felizes com a presença de todas vocês, pessoas que têm o coração aberto, né, para receber essa alteridade, né, que vem de tão longe fecundar nossas teologias. Muito obrigada ao grupo por evocar a nossa ancestralidade nessa noite. Meu nome é Cleusa Caldeira, eu sou teóloga, sou formada aqui na Faculdade Jesuíta, com doutorado e pós-doutorado nessa casa, e é com grande honra e alegria que eu retorno agora, né, à FAGE, com minhas irmãs e meus irmãos negros, negras, africanas e africanos. E para começar, então, eu quero convidar para sentar-se aqui, nesse auditório, a nossa querida e poderosa professora doutora Musa Dubi. Quero convidá-la e vamos saudá-la, né, com palmas. Como não poderia ser diferente, que estamos também marcando o lançamento do Círculo de Teólogas Africanas Preocupadas Brasil, América Latina, nós não estamos sós. E eu quero, então, convidar para sentar-se aqui também a queridíssima professora, pastora Val Moraes. Eu não combinei ainda com ela, mas o círculo, ele é ecumênico e interreligioso. E o nosso trabalho também, na nossa militância, é de enfrentar o racismo religioso. A intolerância religiosa para com as religiões de matriz africana. E eu quero fazer o convite, eu já tinha falado com a pastora Val, de convidar a nossa irmã, a nossa mãe, Vilma, para estar conosco, para representar aqui as religiões de matriz africana. Nós teríamos mais uma breve canção ou... Chocou? Vamos tocar... Depois... Sente-se. Oh, my God.
Então, boa noite. Agora, antes de começar as apresentações, tem que invocar os nossos espíritos africanos, para ajudar-nos a entender e para eles também explicar as coisas Então, a música é Mondoro Zinono Amunazabe, que as ancestrais que bebem as águas nos rios mais espíritos. Então, todos de nós vai ser Mondoro, Mondoro, Mondoro. Zinono Munazabe, Mondo, Zinono Munazabe. Zinono Munazabe, Mondo, Zinono Munazabe. Zinono Munazabe, Mondo, Zinono Munazabe. Zinono Munareva, Mondo, Zinono Munazabe. Zinono Munazabe, Mondo, Zinono Munazabe. Zinono Munareva, Mondo, Zinono Munazabe. Zinono Munazabe, Mondo, Zinono Munazabe. Oh, Mondo, Zinono Munareva, Mondo, Zinono Munazabe. Zinono Munareva, Mondo, Zinono Munazabe. Zinono Munareva, Mondo, Zino, vamos dançar, vamos dançar. Zinono Munazabe, Mondo, Zinono Munazabe. Zinono Munareva, Mondo, Zinono Munazabe. Zino, whoa. What? Muito obrigado, muito obrigado, muito obrigado, muito obrigado.
Oh, que maravilha, não? Para nós que, quando escutamos o som do tambor e nós reconhecemos que esse som vem de muito, muito longe e de muitos, muitos anos. A nossa ancestralidade nos convocando para nos posicionarmos nessa sociedade racista, patriarcal, androcêntrica, misógina. Eu, particularmente, estou muito feliz, pastora Val, irmã mãe Vilma, a doutora Musadub, Choco, todos vocês, porque esse momento para nós representa muito, para nós mulheres teólogas negras no Brasil, invisibilizadas, e esse é um marco muito importante para nós da chegada no Brasil do Círculo de Teólogas Africanas Preocupadas. Então, eu queria fazer uma breve apresentação do que vem a ser o Círculo, porque a professora doutora Musadub também está aqui na figura de representante do Círculo de Teólogas Africanas Preocupadas. Este é o logo oficial do Círculo, como vocês podem constatar. Um breve histórico do Círculo. O Círculo de Teólogas Africanas Preocupadas foi lançado em 1988 em Legon, Gana, por Messiamba, a teóloga ganesa Messiamba Oduyoye e mais 69 mulheres de vários países africanos e da diáspora africana. A Oduyoye é a principal fundadora e ela procurou estabelecer um espaço. Esta é Messiamba Oduyoye. Hoje ela está com 91 anos de idade. Eu tive o privilégio de estar com ela em Gana neste ano. Ela, Oduyoye, então, é a principal fundadora do Círculo de Teólogas Africanas Preocupadas, e ela procurou estabelecer um espaço transformador para as mulheres africanas e também afrodiaspóricas, para pesquisarem, escreverem e publicarem sobre questões de gênero, religião. Depois de perceber que estas últimas eram frequentemente usadas para marginalizar e justificar o status das mulheres como cidadãs de segunda classe. Quem somos nós? Identidade e agenda do Círculo. O Círculo de Teólogas Africanas Preocupadas, doravante Círculo, é uma associação acadêmica pan-africanista de mulheres que pesquisam, publicam e interagem com comunidades em assuntos relacionados a gênero, a religião, teologia. Ou seja, todas as religiões residentes no continente africano e que afetam as mulheres de ascendência africana nas diásporas africanas. Os capítulos ativos, né, cada país tem seu capítulo, e os membros do Círculo são provenientes de 29 países, 3 dos quais estão na diáspora, Reino Unido, Estados Unidos e o mais recente, o Brasil. Seus membros registrados são aproximadamente 1.000 mulheres associadas. São, em grande parte, acadêmicas, líderes religiosas, estudantes de religião e apoiadores, homens, mulheres, que apoiam e que têm interesse também no Círculo. Homens e mulheres de todas as religiões e de todas as etnias. Estrutura de pesquisa e temas do Círculo. Então, fundado em 1989, com essas 70 mulheres, incluindo a sua fundadora, Messiamba Oduyoye, a principal agenda do Círculo era e ainda é investigar como as religiões afetam a vida das mulheres e como elas podem ser interpretadas para o empoderamento das mulheres e de suas comunidades. O Círculo, portanto, realiza pesquisas acadêmicas que buscam ter um impacto transformador na vida das mulheres africanas e afrodiaspóricas e nas comunidades que vivem, na verdade, no mundo em que vivem. A agenda do Círculo faz dele uma associação centrada no gênero, interreligiosa, interdisciplinar, interseccional e transformadora. Ele realiza pesquisas sensíveis ao gênero sobre o conteúdo e o impacto das religiões sobre as mulheres, as crianças, a economia, a raça, a etnia, a saúde, o meio ambiente e outras preocupações. Sua pesquisa é realizada por meio de uma estrutura flexível que consiste em coordenadoras continentais, regionais, nacionais e líderes de pesquisa, que mobilizam os membros e orientam jovens acadêmicas em um tema de pesquisa acordado. O tema de pesquisa é interpretado e abordado de forma diferente por vários países, indivíduos e áreas temáticas. A pesquisa também é realizada para capacitar as comunidades para a transformação. Isso foi atestado pelo foco de pesquisa sobre HIV e AIDS, que capacitou os membros a oferecer liderança entre organizações baseadas na fé, produzindo material relevante, treinando instrutoras e supervisionando programas. Eu gostaria do próximo slide, por favor. Aqui nós vamos passar aqui o slide das ex-coordenadoras, né? Nós temos a Muzimbi Canoiro, ela foi uma coordenadora, né, de 96 a 2002. Pode passar as outras, por favor. Isabel Firi, Malawi, de 2000 a 2007. Fulata Moyo, Malawi, também, de 2007 a 2013. Ellen Labeldan, Nigéria, 2013 a 2019. E Musadub, Botsuana, de 2019 a julho de 2024. Então, o círculo, ele funciona, ele tem uma estrutura, né, que não é hierárquica, evidentemente, porque é o círculo, mas ele tem uma estrutura de coordenação, que é as coordenadoras continentais, e depois tem as coordenadoras regionais de cada país, né, cada região, que é por região da África, África Oriental, aí tem a África do Sul, a África Ocidental, a África de língua francesa, a América Latina e a África Ocidental de língua francesa, eu já falei, né? Mas, e aí nós queremos mostrar também como está estruturado aqui para nós, né? Por favor. E a nossa atual coordenadora, perdão, é a Molly Manioganiz, é a atual coordenadora continental. Eu, Cleusa Caldeira, como coordenadora regional, que o círculo que está sendo lançado é América Latina, Brasil, e também estou acumulando uma função que é coordenadora nacional do Brasil. Junto comigo, nós temos as coordenadoras, o Brasil é muito grande, com essa dimensão continental, nós temos, estamos dividindo o Brasil por regiões. Então, a Gisélia Cruz é a coordenadora da região Nordeste. Ivanete Xavier, coordenadora da região Sul, ela mora em Curitiba. Cristina Borges, muito conhecida aqui de muitos de vocês, ela é coordenadora regional do Sudeste. Pastora Val Moraes, que está aqui conosco, ela é coordenadora regional do Distrito Federal. E aqui, né, a Marina Correia, ela atua conosco desde o princípio do nosso círculo, que começou no final do ano passado. Marina Correia, doutora Marina Correia, do Conselho Editorial Brasil. Ela nos ajuda com o processo de editoração dos textos, dos artigos que nós produzimos e que tem um trabalho de revisão por pares, né? E nós nos ajudamos, então, nos aprimoramento da nossa escrita, porque essa é uma das funções do círculo, nos ajudar a escrever de nível, né, com alta qualidade a nossa produção. Eu acredito que é isso do círculo. Eu quero convidar os nossos irmãos para tocar mais uma canção, e logo em seguida nós vamos fazer a apresentação da nossa convidada, e ela vai proferir a sua conferência. Yes.
Essa aqui vai ser uma música congolesa. Então o Bertrand até vai...
Boa noite. Agora vamos cantar uma música de ofectório. Em Lingala, Zambe, Yamba, Mabonza, Mabiso. Isso quer dizer que Deus acolhe as nossas oferendas. E nesse contexto, vamos oferecer as nossas vidas para Deus.
Vamos. Beleza. Não. Canta, mulher. Não, eu fiz assim. Não. Passa. Toquei. Zambe, Yambae, Mabonza Mabiso, Zambe, Yambae, Mabonza Mabiso, Zambe, Toko pesa yo, Mapana vino, Yamba yango, Zambe. Toko pesa yo, Mapana vino, Yamba yango, Zambe. Yamba mabonza mabiso Zambe Yamba mabonza mabiso Zambe Toko pesa yo bomoi wabiso Yamba yango Zambe Toko me Yamba mabonza mabi son Zambe Yamba mabonza mabi son Zambe Toko pesa yo bomoi boabiso Yamba yango Zambe Toko pesa yo bomoi boabiso Yamba yango Zambe Yamba mabonza mabiso Zambe Yamba mabonza mabiso Zambe Yamba mabonza mabiso Zambe.
Quem disse que nós não podemos homenagear a rua com ação de graças, louvor e adoração, tocando tambor, se deu mal? Olha que coisa linda que nós acabamos de assistir nesse momento. Muito obrigada a vocês, irmãos africanos, por estarem quebrando esse paradigma aqui no Brasil. Bom, eu gostaria de saudar a todas, todos, todes, com a paz da Rua nessa noite. E saudar também, seu nome? Nádila Rogês e nossa irmã, professora doutora Cleusa, nossa irmã Ialorixá Vilma, nosso irmão Chocó. E na pessoa da nossa irmã negra mais nova, do círculo de teólogas que está entre nós nessa noite, a Tainá, eu saúdo também a todas, todos, todes, que investiu o seu tempo nessa noite para estar aqui conosco. Eu gostaria de começar esse momento honroso que foi me dado, lembrando que a antropóloga, escritora e ativista política social Lélia Gonzalez, que é aqui de Minas Gerais, dizia que negro tem que ter nome e sobrenome, senão os brancos arranjam um apelido ao gosto deles. Neguinha, negrinha, negona, negrona, neguinho, negrinho, negão, negrão. E eu aprendi com minhas ancestrais, mulheres negras, minha bisavó, Donária, minha avó, Mercedes, minha mãe, Enicéia, que eu tenho nome e sobrenome. E todo lugar onde eu exercesse o lugar de fala, eu deveria me auto-apresentar. Então, eu começo me auto-apresentando. Meu nome político-social é professora e pastora Val Moraes da Rua. Meu nome civil, Valdicéia de Moraes Teixeira da Silva. Sou casada com o professor especialista e pastor Wilson Barbosa da Silva, mãe de Valquíria de Moraes Teixeira da Silva e de Wilson Barbosa da Silva Júnior, e avó de Dandara Pedro Arthur Pereira de Moraes Barbosa e Vinícius Raquim de Moraes Barbosa. Eu também não poderia deixar de me declarar em relação à minha identidade, à minha ancestralidade e à minha história. Então, eu agradeço a Rua por ter me dado o privilégio de ter sido criada nas famílias Santiago e Moraes, oriundas do Quilombo, São José da Serra, em Valença, no Rio de Janeiro, e Rosa e Teixeira, oriundas dos quilombos Aleluia, Batatal, Cambucá, Conceição do Imbé, Conselheiro Josino, de Campos dos Goitacazes, onde... Vou pedir um pouquinho de água aqui. Minhas bisavós, Donária e Justina, meus bisavôs, Florêncio e Silvestre, obrigada, mãe. E onde eu estou, achei. Minhas avós, Mercedes e Laurentina, meus avós, Isidro e Felismino, minha mãe, Aniceia, e meu pai, Valdir, resistiram à discriminação, ao preconceito, ao racismo, passando por uma das organizações religiosas de matriz africana, a Umbanda, a mesma sua, o espiritismo, o catolicismo, e fazendo a passagem do Aie para o Orum como fiéis do protestantismo. Me sendo fiel às orientações das minhas ancestralidades maternas, eu começo nesse momento, ao momento principal dessa conferência, que é tendo a honra de apresentar a nossa conferencista de hoje, que é professora do Primeiro Testamento no Candler School of Theology, Emory University. Seus interesses de pesquisa incluem literatura bíblica e africana, religião, gênero, pós-colonial, tradução, HIV e AIDS, Boto-Ubuntu e estudos da terra. Ela é autora de interpretação pós-colonial e feminista da Bíblia. Pós-colonial Feminist Interpretation of the Bible, a Bíblia do HIV e AIDS, ensaios selecionados. E coeditora de African Woman Legends and the Spirit of Resistance, New York, wrote Dirge, não falo inglês, e já vou dizendo por que eu não falo. Meu problema é ideológico. Eu não suporto a arrogância de estadunidenses e já tentei aprender inglês várias vezes, não consigo. Então, vão perdoando aí, viu? Terminando, ela visitou mais de 28 países, foi coordenadora continental do Circle of Concerned African Women Theologians, ex-presidente da Sociedade Bíblica de Literatura e professora extraordinária no Instituto de Gênero da Unisa. E com muita honra, eu saio do microfone para pedir a bênção à nossa conferencista de hoje. Recebo a bênção dela e a conduzo, professora doutora Musa Dubi, para ocupar o microfone e aquecer o nosso coração nessa noite, nessa conferência. Por gentileza, vamos ficar de pé e recebê-la, aplaudindo-a efusivamente. Pode gritar. Uhul! Glória a Deus!
Good evening,
Good evening.
and thank you, Pastor Val, for your generous introduction. Thank you, Clarissa. Thank you, everyone. And thank you, everyone who's here, who has come out to be here with me and the rest of the members of the Circle of Concerned African Women Theologians. My lecture, as you would have seen, projected on the screen is What is Truth? John 18, verse 38, a post-colonial trickster reading of Jesus' arrest and trial. I am expecting they will project it up. The lecture is long. I do have a weakness of writing 4 papers in 1 paper. Yes.
So she's saying that she's going to ela está dizendo que não vai, ela vai apresentar tudo, né, em inglês, e o conteúdo que ela vai apresentar vai ser projetado aqui na tela. E depois a gente vai ter o diálogo. Então, pode escutar e ao mesmo tempo acompanhar pelos slides que vão aparecer aqui.
So we will have the translation projected up so that I'm able to read and you can follow the translation on the wall. But I think I must try to summarize the main argument and methods because I don't think I'll be able to read all of it. I begin the paper by presenting the post-colonial theory that I'm using and the justification for using post-colonial theory, namely that more than 85% of the world was impacted by modern colonialism, not mentioning ancient colonialism. So all our texts and theological thinking has been embroidered in and impacted by the experience of colonialism. And it is upon us to analyze that structure within our theological thinking and structures. For failure to do so is to baptize it.
Ela está... Agora sim. Então, ela está dizendo que a leitura dela vai ser a partir de pós-colonialismo. Então, vai ler o trecho de João, que é apresentado aqui, sobretudo a paixão, a partir dos lentes da leitura pós-colonial, sobretudo histórica e sociológica.
So the second part of my paper will then move to read the arrest and trial of Jesus. I will be interrogating how the Jewish leaders are responding to the experience of being a colonized people, colonized by the Roman Empire. The question will be, are they resisting, collaborating, rejecting? And then I will move to analyze Jesus himself. What is his response to the colonialism of his time? I'll analyze what his opponents and rivals characterize him and what it tells us about his stance towards colonialism. Then I'll also look at his ways and deeds. Lastly, I'll analyze the Johannine community itself on what kind of ideology are they presenting towards the empire.
Firstly, she'll analyze. No começo, ela vai analisar, examinar como os líderes judeus, sobretudo os fariseus e os escribas, reagiram ao Império Romano quando foram escritos esse texto joanino, como alguns de nós já sabemos. Então, é na época depois da queda do templo, tudo isso. Então, o que está no pano de fundo no autor dos escritos joaninos? Então, primeiro, ela vai analisar o que os líderes judeus, como os sacerdotes e todos, os líderes do templo, já não existiam mais. Agora eram os fariseus que estavam no controle da sociedade. Então, o que eles reagiram perante ao Império Romano? Depois, ela vai analisar como Jesus e os seguidores de Jesus, sobretudo de ponto de vista da comunidade joanina dessa época, depois dos anos 70, como eles reagiram perante o Império Romano.
So I will be using primarily post-colonial theory, ideological criticism. I'll do a very close analysis of the text from a narrative point of view, while I'm assuming also to some extent historical criticism. So those are the frameworks of my reading of the arrest and trial of Jesus.
Então, esse que o ponto de vista que ela vai assumir nessa apresentação, que como que os líderes judeus e também os cristãos da época estavam se sentindo ou deveriam reagir diante desse império poderoso, e como os textos bíblicos também, e sobretudo na perspectiva do João, alimenta essa perspectiva imperialista.
I think that gives us the framework of what the paper is doing. I don't think I'll be able to read all of it, but I'll make sure that the paper is available to you to read it closely. Now I want to start reading the paper, and you will follow by reading the translation on the projected translation on the wall.
Ela não vai conseguir ler todo o texto porque tem 33 páginas, mas ela vai fazer resumo do texto a partir do que já foi dito, e vocês, por favor, podem acompanhar o texto lá nos slides.
When you want me to stop closer, just indicate, and I'll summarize whatever's left, and the members will read for themselves the rest of the paper.
Sim, ela vai resumir e Cleusa, por favor, vai, como se chama, depois vai ter o diálogo que ela vai coordenar, e agora vai ser só o resumo. Então, pode ler tudo que vai aparecer aqui, porque ela não vai ler tudo que vai aparecer aqui, mas só os pontos-chave do texto.
Thank you, Shoko. Now you may take a break.
Ela me agradece e vou ficar agora quieto.
As a child of Zimbabwean migrant who relocated to Botswana when Black people were dispossessed of their land, my historical context is post-colonial. Like other two-thirds world population, modern imperialism has remained a narrative woven in our bodies, spirits, mind, and lands, ever demanding to be read and interpreted. A post-colonial framework of reading is thus the art of wrestling with the past and the present in the quest to glean our shared futures, changed and healed futures. Post-colonial and literary theories describe a myriad ways of reading that explore how imperialism was imposed on various nations and populations and time, its impact on the colonized population and lands, and how the colonized responded, resisted, collaborated, and survived. In literary studies, post-colonial theories explore the production and the role of literature and cultural texts in modern imperial colonial relationships by examining texts that arise from both ends, as well as the role of pre-existing literature. The application of post-colonial theories to biblical literature falls within the latter. For most two-thirds world population, biblical literature was pre-existing literature that came with modern colonizing powers and was received by the colonized subjects of the Christian empires. Consequently, in biblical studies, post-colonial ways of reading examine, among many numerous ways, how biblical texts were used in modern times to endorse or to resist or to reject or to collaborate with imperialism. By interrogating the ideology of ancient biblical texts, the intersection of colonizing ideology of ancient and modern times, and the use of biblical texts in imperial contexts, the intersection of colonialism with gender, with race, and the construction of identities and the representations of the other in colonial literature. A post-colonial approach may examine the social location and interpretation of the colonizing, the colonized, the displaced, the diaspora people, and the contemporary biblical readers in relation to the imperial colonial power struggles of both the past and contemporary times. It may also examine the context of the production of biblical texts, the imperial movements of ancient times, by looking at how the biblical nation or Jews resisted, rejected, collaborated with various imperial movements of their time, and how these embedded textual positions functioned in modern imperial colonial contexts for supporting imposition or supporting resistance or collaboration with imperial forces. A major part of post-colonial studies investigates the contact zones, the boundaries, the border crossing, the border patrol, the in-between spaces, or the third space created by the collision of the colonized and the colonizer, which inevitably begets hybridity and mimicry. In some, post-colonial theories examine the intertwinement of international histories by highlighting the international geographies of domination, subordination, and resistance through placing cultural texts at the very center of imperial colonial power struggles. Biblical texts and their readers, that is you and me, of various times and places, are therefore not exempt. In fact, they're at the very center of it. Against this background, this essay will examine the events leading to the arrest of Jesus, the arrest itself, the trial of Jesus in the Gospel of John, examining the world of the text by looking at how the characters of the story respond to the historical imperialism of their time. The latter will also involve looking at the characterization of Jewish leaders, Jesus himself, and the Johannine community around the time of the Gospel's finalization. Therefore, the presentation of Pilate and other Roman leaders in the Johannine narrative must be viewed as relevant for the later audiences, as Jesus is remembered within the later Johannine situation while rooted in an earlier memory. Since all texts are always ambiguous and complex, far more than any reader's discernment, it is important that I should state my guiding questions, which also constitute the limitation of my talk and its findings. My guiding questions here shall be as follows. First, are the Jewish leaders of the Johannine Gospel collaborating or resisting or rejecting the Roman Empire's rule? In short, I seek to investigate the standpoint of the Jewish leaders towards the empire as presented by John's Gospel. Second, what is the standpoint of Jesus and the Johannine community, who are the producers of the Gospel of John as we have it? Are they collaborating, resisting, or rejecting the Roman Empire? Third, does the ideology that informs their movement resist, embrace, or collaborate with imperialism? In asking these questions, I shall be dealing with both the historical world of the text and the world within the text. Clearly, this means that I shall be reading on and through the text. I shall be reading in front and behind. I shall be interrogating the narrative devices of the text and what they tell us, while at the same time working on a very strong assumption that the narrative arises from a particular historical world, an imperialized context or a colonized context. While I do not equate the narrative with historical facts, I nonetheless assume that the history informed the narrative, or that informed the narrative of John's Gospel. So John's account may still inform awareness of the Jesus history behind the literary text. I am particularly interested in the historical context of the Roman imperialism and how it informed the construction of the Johannine Passion. In short, my post-colonial approach reads the text as both the mirror of and the window to the past. My questions are informed and motivated by the experience of modern Christian nations who worked hand in glove with modern imperialism and their leaders and nations. Overall, I am largely driven by the quest to understand why the modern Christian nations and churches were unable to name imperialism as unacceptable, evil, and exploitative structure, both then and now. In the story, now coming to the story, in the story leading to the arrest of Jesus and the actual arrest, the trial, and the crucifixion of Jesus, the implied author demonstrates political awareness of the colonial setting of his or her time. The implied author portrays the Jews as colonized people, those who are entered and extremely divided by the presence of a foreign power. Hence, we find the followers of Jesus on the other hand and the followers of Moses on the other hand. Yet the Jews of the Johannine Gospel were much more diverse than John 9 suggests, since there were many other Jews who openly believed in Jesus and others who were faithful to both the followers of Jesus and Moses, as characterized, for example, by Nicodemus and Joseph of Arimathea. In the colonial context of the gospel, both the followers of Moses and those of Jesus, they are wrestling to define what amounts to the proper practice of Judaism in a context that has now been shaken by the Roman Empire. This is a context after the Jewish-Roman War of between 66 and 73 CE, where the Jews lost their major cultural and political symbol, the temple and the holy city. Power, as the most scholarly research tells us, is now in the hands of the Pharisees, who are grouped together in John's Gospel with high priests and other priests. The Pharisees, a Jewish group whose rise dates back to the Maccabean revolt, had long devised a type of Judaism that was not primarily dependent on the temple. Consequently, they offer the most viable form of Judaism in the post-70 CE era. The finalization of the Gospel of John is dated between 90 and 100 CE, that is about 3 decades after the destruction of the temple by the Roman Empire. The questions I wish to explore now are the Pharisees, the scribes, and the Jewish leaders collaborating, rejecting, or resisting the Roman Empire? Is Jesus and the Johannine believers rejecting, resisting, or collaborating? These questions shall now be examined in relation to the passion of Jesus in their given order. In John 11, verses 47 up to 51, the reader discerns concern about living with and under the imperial powers. The imperial colonial context is confirmed as real. National Jewish leaders are characterized as concerned that everyone will believe in Jesus and the Romans will come and destroy both our holy place and our nation. Verse 48. Of course, since the Johannine Gospel was written decades after the destruction of the temple, this verse is an interpretation of the arrest and crucifixion of Jesus in the light of the empire. Members of the Johannine community that present to us the Johannine narrative are placing the Roman imperial context at the center of the Jewish leaders' decision to arrest and have Jesus sentenced to death. The leaders are depicted as fully aware of the violent means of the Roman Empire when it comes to anyone who challenges their power. Jesus' rising fame would indeed be one such case, should it come to the attention of the Roman Empire. Fear could be read as driving their decisions, but it could well be said that the Jewish leaders' decision was a calculated move to protect whatever was left of their nation in the light of the violent imperial power. The violence of Roman Empire is most probably still vivid in their memories, given that they had lost the temple and the holy city not so long ago, 70 CE. Following this defeat in the Jewish-Roman War of 70 CE, national Jewish leaders are depicted in John's Gospel as being in a process of preserving the nation by negotiating with the enemy, namely the Roman Empire. They know that at this stage it would do their nation no good to provoke the Roman Empire into another military attack. Consequently, they seek to steer the nation to operate between collaboration and resistance. They are operating in the third space and occupying the in-between space. This is better examined closely. Living and working and leading within the space of collaboration and resistance is a strategy that seeks to avoid open rejection of the imperial power. The Pharisees and the chief priests ask, what are we to do given Jesus' threatening fame? Here the reader discerns that the Jewish leaders are characterized as seeking for means for taking necessary precaution. They seek to prevent any further attack. They wish to adopt a strategy that will assure the Roman Empire that the Jewish nation is still a faithful subject. This position, of course, has nothing to do with the Jewish leaders wishing to be subject to the Roman Empire. It has nothing to do with faithfulness to the empire. Rather, it is a position of knowing that at this particular point in time in the history of their subjugation, their methods of resistance must entail some form of collaboration in order to avoid complete annihilation of their nation. In short, their collaboration is their very means of resistance as preservation. This position is best captured by Cephas' reasoning and ways. Cephas states, you know nothing at all. You do not understand that it is better that for you to have one man die for the people than to have the whole nation destroyed. 1150. The anguish in the high priest is evident in his introductory phrases when he says, you know nothing at all, you do not understand. Here, the Johannine writer highlights the feelings of those who experienced the violence of the Roman Empire, thereby underlining the trauma left behind by the 66 to 73 CE war. In this literary presentation, the high priest holding the highest office of the land embodies the agony that befell the whole nation. Most council members would not have needed much persuasion on this issue. Thus, the council decides that Jesus should die so as not to allow his fame to bring the Roman wrath upon the nation. The concerns of the Jewish leaders are validated, since in John 6:14 to 15, it informs us that the masses had already tried to install Jesus as their king by force, although he rejected their coronation. Reading this passage from a post-colonial perspective, I see the decision of the council as a strategy of resistance that can only happen within collaboration. It is a strategy that fully acknowledges that the military might of the empire is far above that of the colonized nation of the Jews. It is also informed by the recent memory of Rome's viciousness. Of prime importance, therefore, is preserving the colonized nation from another attack. Their strategy embodies both collaboration and resistance, or what Letitia Guardiola Science has termed camouflage. Camouflage is a strategy adopted by the colonized to hide their true colors from the colonizer. They act as chameleons to trick the system. The subject thus appear to be reverent, cooperative, and complying with their subordinate position, when in fact they are actively rejecting them. This approach embodies some form of trickster approach, which gives one impression to some when it intends something else to others. The trickster appears in various forms or characters in different cultures. In my Botswana culture, it is the hare or the rabbit, but in other cultures, it is the spider, the jackal, the tortoise, sometimes a man or a woman. Trickery is more often than not a weapon of the powerless in the face of the powerful. In the Johannine Gospel, the Jews, while appearing in different social classes, are powerless as colonized subjects of the Roman Empire. As we shall see in the arrest and trial of Jesus, they resort to trickery even further. One notable feature about this council meeting is its tone. All along, the Johannine writer has presented the rivals of Jesus in very unkind ways as liars and children of the devil, if you look into chapter 8, verse 44, or describe them as without sight. In this passage, the reader is struck by the change of tone. The concern of Jewish leaders is presented as genuine agony, genuine concern, genuine fear for the nation. This is captured by the question they pose and the reason supplied. What are we to do if we let him, that is Jesus, go on like this? Both our holy place and nation shall be destroyed by the Romans. The Johannine writer does not present the Jewish leaders as liars and murderers in this sin. It is quite notable that the high priest is even characterized as a true prophet. It is stated that he, Cephas, did not say this on his own, but being a high priest, that year he prophesied that Jesus was about to die for the nation. In the book, The Art of Biblical Narrative, Robert Alter argues that readers should be alert when a change that is out of the norm occurs, for the narrative seeks to signal something very important. This positive characterization of a Jewish leader, Cephas, in the Johannine Gospel is therefore a notable communication. I read this positive presentation as indicating that both the followers of Moses and the followers of Jesus are under the same yoke of oppression, and that they are all bound by fear when it comes to Roman occupation and oppression. Both parties agree that the Roman Empire is capable of destroying them, and they have a good reason to suspect that Jesus' fame carries political implication. This early meeting and its decision provide me as a post-colonial reader with a reading grid for interpreting the proceedings of the arrest, the trial, and the crucifixion that follow. By the time we get to the arrest, the trial, and the crucifixion, we know that whatever and however these Jewish leaders will present their case to the powers that be is driven by the strategy of living between collaboration and resistance under the colonizer, a strategy of negotiating with the enemy, in this case, the Roman Empire. It is a position of camouflage, a strategy that works through tricking the powers that be in order to survive. While Pilate, who will receive Jesus' case, remains ignorant about the real motivation of the high priest, the reader participates in the trial from a privileged position, knowing that what drives them, their decisions. The reader knows that it is not that they do not like Jesus, nor do not believe him, nor fail to acknowledge his potential. The reader also knows that it is not that they want or like the Roman Empire. Neither are they faithful to the Roman Empire. Rather, they are faithful to their own survival as a people in the face of a powerful and violent empire. They are concerned that should the Roman authorities suspect possible rebellion, they might just unleash again its violence upon them and annihilate their already weakened nation. The Jewish leaders thus plot and decide that Jesus should be sacrificed to save the nation. This move remains hidden to the Roman Empire, especially their representative, the governor, Pilate, who runs the trial. Yet, capitalizing on irony, the reader also has more privileged information even over the high priest, who is presented as speaking above himself through prophecy. When we turn to the arrest, in chapter 18, verses 1 up to 13, the text reminds us that the decision that was taken by the council and that it is still operative. The narrator reliably informs us that Jesus was moved from Annas, the father-in-law, to the high priest, then to Cephas, and that Cephas was, I quote, Cephas was the one who had advised that Jews that it was better to have one person die for the people, I close quote. This reminder is very important because it's given by the reliable voice of the narrator. It provides us with the necessary background within which to interpret the arrest, trial, and the crucifixion of Jesus. The narrator wants the reader to remember the motivation behind handing Jesus over to the Roman Empire, that it was because it was better for one person to die for the people than for the whole nation to be destroyed. As a privileged post-colonial reader, I'm now curious to see how the Jewish leaders are going to trick Pilate into believing that Jesus is an enemy of the state without exposing their underlying motivation. The trial drama begins. Note here the dramatization of the dialogue between Pilate and the Jewish leaders in John 18, verses 29 to 31. Pilate says, "What accusation do you bring against this man?" The Jewish leaders answer, "If this man was not a criminal, we would not have handed him to you, Pilate. You take him yourselves and judge him according to your law." Jewish leaders answer, "We are not permitted to put anyone to death." With the background information that we have from chapter 11, 47, verse 47 to 51, the reader is not surprised that the Jewish leaders do not want to openly pronounce the crime of Jesus. Rather, they adopt an indirect way of answering Pilate's question. The The dialogue is thus concise and strange, for Jewish leaders do not wish to disclose their real motivation for bringing Jesus before Pilate. Their second answer to Pilate's question also attests to their undisclosed agenda. Here, Pilate invites them to take Jesus and judge him according to their law, but they respond, "We are not permitted to put anyone to death." This response sufficiently characterizes Jesus as an enemy of the state, which Pilate understands, for as soon as he goes back to Jesus, he asks him a very politically loaded question. He says to Jesus, "Are you the king of the Jews?" In this narrative opening, the Pilate is presented as an ignorant character as compared to any other reader of John. Unknown to Pilate, he and the institute he represents, the Roman Empire, are the problem. If these Jewish leaders were to speak openly about their case, they would be heard saying, "Rome destroyed our holy city and temple, and we fear that it will do the same again if we let Jesus' fame continue gathering a big following around him." The setting of the colonizer, however, does not allow them to speak their minds openly, for now they adopt the camouflage. They must operate between collaboration and resistance. In short, there may seem to be an overt identification with the empire, with what the empire stands for, but their wish is to protect their nation from destruction. In the dialogue between Jewish leaders and Pilate is thus labored, for they are speaking in two different levels. Pilate is trying to understand the crime of Jesus, while the Pharisees are trying hard not to disclose their real concern. In his failure to understand, Pilate tries to free Jesus on several occasions, in fact, about 4 times, while the Jewish leaders move from the most vague, unstated accusation to the implied accusation in 1907 to the most explicit, persuasive accusation in 1912, in order to protect their nation. In the process, the Jewish leaders seemingly embody the colonizers' wish and appear to be perfect collaborators. 2 passages are noteworthy here. Chapter 19, verse 12. From then on, Pilate tried to release him, that is Jesus, but the Jews cried out, "If you release this man, you are no friend to the emperor. Anyone who claims to be the king sets himself against the emperor." 19 verses 15 to 16a, Pilate answered them, "Shall I crucify your king?" The chief priest answered, "We have no king but the emperor." Then he handed him over to them for crucifixion. In these verses, the Jewish leaders present themselves in complete harmony with the Roman Empire, confessing, "We have no king but the emperor." They win their case at this point as Pilate is forced to believe they are protecting the interests of Rome. Pilate is also forced to demonstrate his allegiance to the Caesar. For when he insists that he does not find Jesus guilty, the Jewish leaders keep shouting, "If you release this man, you are no friend of the emperor. Everyone who claims to be the king sets himself against the emperor." Pilate thus hands Jesus over to them to be crucified. This is the climax of the trial, as the tension and the conflict between the Jewish leaders and Jesus is resolved. From my perspective as a post-colonial reader, the actions of the Jewish leaders should be seen as actual resistance rather than collaboration. In what is seen as the most shameful moments of their lives, confessing the emperor as their only king instead of the Lord God as their only king, the Jewish leadership has won their victory, namely to protect their vulnerable nation from further devastation of the Roman Empire. Pilate has been tricked. If the Pharisees are resisting the Roman Empire within the context of collaboration, what about Jesus? Is Jesus collaborating? Is he resisting? Is he rejecting the Roman Empire? There are 3 ways in which I intend to assess the position of Jesus and his followers towards the Roman Empire. How his rivals characterize him, by assessing his own ways and the ideology of John's gospel in general. When I assess what the rivals of Jesus say and think about him, and what they do to him in the events surrounding his arrest, trial, and crucifixion, I'm persuaded that Jesus is characterized as one who resists the Roman Empire in the text. Starting from the above concern stated in chapter 11, verse 47, Jesus' rivals fear that his fame will bring Rome's wrath upon their nation, leading to this emergency council meeting in which Jesus is sacrificed lest the nation is destroyed. Similarly, at the trial of Jesus, his rivals underline that Jesus is a figure who opposes the power of the emperor. First, when Pilate offers them the choice between Jesus and Barabbas, a bandit or another insurrectionist, they choose Barabbas over Jesus. Their choice suggests that Barabbas is less dangerous than Jesus, insofar as challenging the Roman Empire is concerned. When this fails to catch Pilate's attention, they play two other cards that further characterize Jesus as one who is resisting the Roman Empire. They say he ought to die because he has claimed to be the Son of God. Verse 12, they say, everyone who claims to be king sets himself against the emperor. The first quote comes from the Jewish perspective, where the expected Messiah and liberator was also regarded as the Son of God. The second statement explicitly characterizes Jesus as the one who resists the empire. He sets himself against the emperor, they say. He's an enemy of the emperor, a rival who should be eliminated by all the faithful subjects of the emperor. Indeed, Pilate is forced to show his allegiance to the emperor, compelling him to politically to hand Jesus over to be crucified. Both statements are therefore in agreement with one another and with the scenario in John 11, 47 to 51, which categorically claimed that if Jesus is not eliminated, his fame will bring the wrath of the Roman Empire to the nation. Relying simply on the words of his rivals, Jesus' stance towards the empire seems quite revolutionary. It entertains no tolerance for the colonial oppression, no collaboration. This is how his rivals present him. However, is this position backed up by the words of Jesus and the ideology of John's gospel? Let us examine some of the specifics of the dialogue. Scene 2, Pilate turns to Jesus. In the dialogue between Pilate and Jesus, John's stance towards the empire becomes clear. Pilate to Jesus, are you the king of the Jews? Jesus answered, do you ask this on your own, or did others tell you about me? Pilate says, what have you done? Jesus, my kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were from this world, my followers would be fighting to keep me from being handed over to the Jews. But as it is, my kingdom is not from here. Pilate, so you are a king? Jesus says, you say that I'm a king. For this I came into the world, to testify to the truth. Everyone who belongs to the truth listens to my voice. Pilate asks, what is the truth? Jesus remains silent. Pilate, where are you from? Do you refuse to talk to me? Do you not know that I have the power to release you and the power to crucify you? Jesus responds, you would have no power over me unless it has been given to you from above. Therefore, the one who handed me over to you is guilty of a greater sin. The words of Jesus are more elusive than the way he's characterized by his rivals. Jesus does not give an affirmative yes or no to the question of whether he is the king of the Jews. When Pilate presses him, demanding to know what he has done, Jesus begins to talk about his kingdom, he underlines that his kingdom is not from this world and explicitly declares that if it were of this world, his followers would fight to keep him from being handed over to the Jewish leaders. To assess the stance of Jesus from this assertion, one must understand what Jesus means when he says his kingdom is not from this world. Does Jesus mean that his kingship poses no threat over the Roman Empire? Jesus continues to say, my kingdom is not from here. These two phrases refer to both place and origin of his kingship. You can also see in John 3, verses 3 up to 8, where he uses this place, not from here and from above, where the spiritual character, place, and origin of Jesus always suggests superiority over everything else. To some extent, Pilate's response helps us to decode the meaning of Jesus' words, or perhaps Pilate's own interpretation of Jesus' words. That is, Pilate seems assured that the kingdom of Jesus is not a threat to the Roman Empire, as he goes outside and says, I find no case against him. Pilate then offers the Jewish leaders Barabbas the bandit, hoping that they will choose Jesus. Their response indicates that Pilate has grossly miscalculated. Pilate, as we have shown, does not know the motivation of the Jewish leaders and what they regard as a threat, namely the Roman Empire, not Jesus. They demand Jesus' crucifixion. This demand, of course, indicates their agenda of protecting the nation. What then? Do the words of Jesus indicate that he's collaborating with the Roman Empire? Is he resisting or rejecting it? Is he perhaps like the Jewish leaders, negotiating the delicate space of living between collaboration and resistance? Is he also tricking Pilate? The scholars of John are divided on this issue. The majority hold that Jesus' kingdom does not necessarily challenge the kingdom of Rome. Some hold that the passage reflects the stand of the early church towards Rome. In earlier analysis prior to the Johannine Empire studies, rendered by Carter, Theta, David Rensberger's approach was perhaps the earliest exception to this perspective or interpretation. For Rensberger argued that what is not of this world may nevertheless be in the world, as Jesus and his followers are. And Jesus' words about the kingdom do not deny that it is kingship. Jesus' kingship, though rooted in the coming world, nevertheless exerts the peculiar authority already over this one. That is Rensberger's argument. For Gail O'Day underlines that the true judge, Jesus, is the one who depicts Pilate's authority and position as the judge as wanting. Stephen Moore analysis, on the other hand, indicates that the narrative stance is complex and ambiguous. Still focusing on the words of Jesus and the stance towards Roman Empire, it is worth asking, who is perceived as an enemy? Does Jesus regard the Roman Empire as an enemy in his conversation with Pilate? First, he says his followers would have fought against the Jewish leaders, not the Roman Empire, if his kingdom were in this world, of this world. Jesus underlines that he regards his fellow country people rather than the Roman Empire as his enemy. This is underlined in chapter 19, verse 11, when Jesus tells Pilate, the one who handed me over to you is guilty of a greater sin. While it seems certain that Jesus does not regard the Roman Empire but his fellow country people as his enemy, 4 views can be read from this verse. First, Jesus admits that he indeed has a kingdom, thereby suggesting that he is a king. Second, this verse could also be read in the light of John 11:47 to 48. suggesting that Jesus would not be on trial if it were not for the conspiracy of his fellow Jewish leaders. That is, they are gambling with Jesus' life to protect the colonized nation from further wrath. Third, Jesus' use of the comparative phrase here, greater sin, is notable. The phrase suggests that Jesus critiques his fellow Jewish leaders for their conspiracy. That while Jesus critiques his fellow Jewish leaders for their conspiracy, the Roman Empire is not thereby exonerated from great sin or even greatest sin, namely their art of dominating and exploiting other nations. With this phrase, Jesus declares to Pilate, you and the powers that you represent are and have committed great sin against the Jewish nation. But this perspective is covert in that Pilate seemingly does not grasp the subtext in Jesus' response. Fourth, the fact that Jesus says that his kingdom is not of this world can be read within the context of the whole gospel and its emerging audiences as underlining to Pilate that Jesus' kingdom is greater than that of Caesar, both then and later. It is possible that Jesus, like the Jewish leaders, is also acting within a framework of resistance through collaboration to trick the system. Is it possible? Of course, he lived that prophetic stance in his words and works. The question rather is, could it be that he is in solidarity with his fellow Jewish leaders, given that Jesus is presented as also trying to trick Pilate to believe that the Jewish leaders are on his side? Again, with John 11, verses 47 to 48 in view, Pilate could be seen as being tricked from both sides. Consequently, while Jesus' first response covertly suggests that Pilate is not exonerated from greater sin, his further response confirms to Pilate that the Jewish leaders want Pilate to be confess to Pilate what the Jewish leaders want Pilate to believe. They are collaborators who seek to eliminate all possible rivals and to the empire, including Jesus. This confirmation, however, does not necessarily place Jesus on the side of Pilate, but rather on the side of his fellow Jewish leaders in tricking Pilate through the assurance that his kingdom is not threatened. Consequently, Pilate, and by extension Rome, are seemingly presented as a friend rather than an enemy, as articulated in 1911. Here Jesus tells Pilate that you would have no power over me unless it had been given to you from above. The phrase from above has been used in John's gospel to underline the unique origin and power of Jesus as opposed to any other outstanding Jewish leader such as Moses, Nicodemus, and John the Baptist. Of course, scholars have interpreted these words differently. The idea that the power of the empire has the same source and place of origin as the power of Jesus strongly puts Jesus together with the collaborators, given that the Gospel of John insisted that he, Jesus, is the one from above and the only one who's able to reveal God to us. It is disconcerting, disturbing that it is suggested that the power of Pilate may also have been given from above. Pilate and the institution for which he stands for are seemingly recast, therefore, into benign power. However, the reader once again is reminded of the real concern. Jesus' fame is seen as a genuine potential threat to the imperial rule, and Jesus' fame is seen as a genuine potential threat to the imperial rule, and Jesus' names it as such as a greater sin. This leaves the reader noting that Jesus, like the Jewish leaders, is working within a paradigm of collaboration, resistance, trickery. Pilate is seemingly tricked from both sides of the Jewish groups, the disciples of Moses and the disciples of Jesus. The motivation of the Johannine writer seems deeper, for it is suggested that even the high priest was speaking above himself when he suggested that Jesus must die for the nation. John 11, verses 51 to 50 elaborates that Cephas did not say this on his own, but being the high priest of that year, he prophesied that Jesus was about to die for the nation, and not the nation only, but to gather into one the dispersed children of God. In this claim, the Johannine writer and the community also choose to interpret the death of Jesus at another level. According to Gail O'Day, Cephas' words are not simply the political realism he intends, but are inspired, although unintentionally, prophecy about the true meaning of Jesus' death. The fourth gospel uses it to show how power of priesthood can witness to the truth of Jesus even as it works to actively suppress it. For Raymond Brown, the Johannine writer sees this to mean that Jesus will die on behalf of the nation, and indeed to gather even the dispersed children of God and make them one. What about the ideology of domination in John, then and now? Examining the ideology of John's gospel towards the other, their lens, is equally important for interrogating the stance of Jesus and the Johannine community towards imperialism. According to Edward Said, at the very basic level, imperialism means thinking about, settling on, controlling land that you do not possess, that is distant, that is lived on and owned by others. In my paper, Savior of the World, I argue that if one locates the Johannine community within the setting of the colonized, the text does not only reflect conflict and competition among the local groups, it also assumes Johannine narratives. It also assumes Johannine narrative designs about that propound imperialism ideologies. In its strategy of elevating Jesus above any other cultural figure amongst the Jews and in the world, for instance, is a colonizing ideology. In John, we find that the authority of Jesus is emphatically heightened over all cultural figures of note and their earthly spaces of authority through constructing the spatial origins of Jesus as from above, from heaven, and emphasizing that no one has ever seen or heard God except for Jesus, who descended from the Father or from heaven. The function of out of this world spatial origin of Jesus, however, is to take control of this world. In my analysis of John 4, 1 up to 42, I found the gospel writer also peddling colonial ideology, which gave Jesus power over other cultures, other stories, other religions, spaces, and institutions by elevating him above all and declaring him to be Savior of the world. A title that was used for the emperor. Upon Jesus' death, the transference of power to the disciples, his disciples, gives them the power to travel into other cultural worlds and spaces with the same power and method of devaluing and subordinating difference, while elevating Jesus as above all, an ideology that closely befriends and supports an alternative form of imperialism. Such an imperial ideology is definitely not helped by regarding Pilate as one whose power also originates from above. In short, with Jesus not making an explicit condemnation of political economic imperialism, and with Jesus and his disciples giving themselves power over all cultural spaces, geographical spaces, the ideology of John is independently and thoroughly imperialist. I'm going to move to the concluding paragraphs. In this paper, I have used both post-colonial and trickster theories to investigate the arrest and trial of Jesus, beginning from John 11, verses 45 to 55. Conclusion. Little bit up. Yes. Yes. In this paper, I've used both post-colonial and trickster theories to investigate the arrest and trial of Jesus, beginning with the council meeting in John 11, 45 to 55. My argument holds that the Jewish leaders are occupying the in-between space in their colonial context as subjugated people. They know and they fear the might of the Roman Empire. Their strategy of resistance in this particular context is characterized by trickery, which wears the cloak of collaboration while seeking survival strategies for a nation that has already been weakened by the empire and continues to live in the shadow of the same. Cephas and the Jewish religious leaders are shown to be resisting the Roman Empire by appearing before the governor Pilate as supporters and firm friends of the Roman Empire. Their interests and commitments, however, are elsewhere. My analysis of John's gospel has shown that Jesus' fans and opponents characterize him as a threat to the empire. In my analysis, I found it hard to prove that Johanna and Jesus openly resisted the imperial power of his time. Rather, Jesus says, "My kingdom is not from this world. If my kingdom were from this world, my followers would be fighting to keep me from being handed over to the Jews. But as it is, my kingdom is not from here." On its own, this statement could be legitimately seen as resistance towards imperialism, as Reinberger and others argue. What makes this argument difficult to sustain is the characterization of Jesus in John, the so-called high Christology. The characterization of Jesus as from above and above all propounds its own ideology of colonization of other cultures and spaces, and thus legitimates the Christian move to colonize other nations and other cultures. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, professora Musa. Eu creio que, deixa eu ver o horário, temos um tempo para as perguntas, né? Então, o Choco vai nos ajudar com a tradução das perguntas para o inglês e também da resposta do inglês para o português, ok? Eu gostaria de saber... temos perguntas dirigidas à professora, doutora Musa Dubi. Ok, Jonas. Eu creio que temos mais perguntas. Poderíamos fazer umas 3 perguntas, né? E aí ela responde. Mais alguém? Jonas está na fila. Temos lá um irmão que eu não sei o nome. Então, tá, o Jonas fala em inglês, para facilitar, faz em português e inglês, então? Ou, não, ok, ele está vindo.
Pronto. Boa noite, professora. Muito obrigado. Ficou bem claro a ideia central, né, do método, que trabalha tanto com a análise narrativa, a análise dos diálogos, essa desconfiança do autor, mas para nós entendermos melhor, haveria algum, digamos, mainframe, algum... como nós poderíamos aplicar essa metodologia de interpretação pós-colonial, por exemplo, a outros textos, só para ajudar, de repente, alguns colegas que ainda não tiveram contato com a teoria, com a metodologia pós-colonial. Então, digamos assim, 2 ou 3 pontos, né, que pudessem ajudar os colegas, de repente, a iniciar nessa jornada.
Thank you for the presentation. Thank you for the presentation. I find it interesting that Jesus, in this case, is presented as one who is in collaboration and at the same time in resistance, but that in the end establishes himself as a potential colonial master. Therefore, I'm thinking in our age and in post-colonialism, what is the response of the church to the post-colonial status of countries which are still under the yoke of colonialism, under the yoke of neo-colonialism? In that Jesus, in that case, in antiquity, seemed to have collaborated to some extent, and worse off, established his own colonial system, which allows him to overtake all cultures. Therefore, in our case, as people who are not only Christians, but are enculturized, how can we, as a church or as a Christian faith, respond, or rather even give counsel to our governments on the way forward towards this, or against this neo-colonialism in which we face? And I think that would apply for both Africa, Brazil, and some countries probably in Asia. Thank you.
Professora, a gente agradece suas palavras, sua presença. A exposição foi genial. E a gente sabe também que neutralidade é impossível. Então, a minha pergunta é o do porquê o pós-colonial, e não anticolonial, ou decolonial, ou descolonial.
How could we apply this method for those of us who are not in touch with it? The first thing, if you are not in touch with a post-colonial theory of analysis, ask yourself why.
Respondendo à primeira pergunta, como responder para os que não têm contato com o método pós-colonial? E se não tem esse contato com essa análise pós-colonial, deveria ter contato com ele.
if more than 85% of the world was colonized in modern times, if most of us, if not all of us, are sitting on histories that are colonial, if most of our theological institutions and churches were participants in the history of colonialism, why wouldn't we be in touch with colonialism, with post-colonialism? That's the first question we must ask ourselves.
E se mais de 80% do nosso mundo foi colonizado, se a maioria das nossas instituições religiosas, acadêmicas, foram instituídos pelos colonizadores, por que não temos esse contato com o método pós-colonial?
I have asked you to ask yourself that question. If that post-colonialism is not featured in your teaching, in your methods of analysis of the text, in your theology, it does mean that we are collaborators with the structures of oppression.
Então, ela está desafiando a gente que se não tem esse método já na mão, significa que o nosso caminho acadêmico não foi feito ao nível suficiente, porque devemos ter contato com isso, porque somos produtos desse sistema colonial.
So I would say the place to start is ownership.
O primeiro lugar para começar é o ownership, que é pertencimento, sim, que eu sou o dono, literalmente falando. Ser donos de nossas vidas, donos da nossa história, donos do nosso ser, tanto o passado, o presente e o futuro. Devemos ser donos de nós próprios.
The place to start is when we as a church and as theological institution own up to the history that we have been participants in colonialism. I have to tell you my story. I started the question of colonial criticism because as a Christian, I was embarrassed that every history I read, the church was so eloquently one with the colonial powers of their countries, dispossessing people worldwide. And I asked myself, I wanted to know why the church that I believe is an institution of God could not name this as oppression, as a structure of an evil structure. Why? I wanted to know if it is in the text, the biblical text for me as a biblical scholar, or was it in the readers of the Bible who failed to name colonialism as an evil structure? So it was personal interrogation and responsibility about the faith that I owned. And when I looked at the testimonies of history, I wanted to ask why and to say, how can I teach differently?
Então, em resumo, como ela é uma filha de imigrantes zimbabueanos que foram despojados da sua terra, e a igreja sempre estava por trás do colonialismo, sempre apoiava o colonialismo. E agora, o que nós, como a igreja de hoje, será que vamos ainda continuar a colaborar ou resistir a influência colonialista que chegou, que a igreja no passado apoiou? Então, isso é a pergunta que empurrou ela para começar trilhar esse caminho decolonial, que como a igreja aqui é um lugar ou um espaço, uma ferramenta, né, de formação, um ferramenta de, como se chama? Formação de consciência, né? Apoiava isso. Então, será que a gente não precisa pensar de modo diferente? Que é, sobretudo, decolonial. Não apoiar o que está o João, o evangelista, né? Que, como a gente já viu, que não é Jesus. Alguém falou que Jesus é a segunda pergunta que ela vai responder. Mas é a comunidade joanina que está numa situação de opressão, que viu Jesus também como sendo apoiando o sistema imperialista. Então, será que nós também devemos continuar apoiando o sistema imperialista ou devemos pensar de modo diferente? Mais ou menos por aí.
So I guess, Jonas, my answer is I don't believe it's because people don't know the theory or they don't know where to get the books. I think where people need to start is owning up to doing ethical theology, ethical biblical interpretation, owning up to the histories that we stand in and operate from. So I think that's where we need to begin, and asking ourselves whether we want to teach and do a theology that supports structures of oppression or theology that reveals the structures of oppression and seeks for justice.
Então, devemos tomar a responsabilidade se queremos continuar apoiando o sistema vigente ou queremos mudar para ter uma teologia e filosofia que vai ser mais libertador.
The second speaker, Jesus as a colonizer. What do we do with Jesus functioning, the characterization of Jesus functioning as a legitimizer of the colonization of the other is a very big question. Can we have a Christology that does not seek to erase other cultures? It's a big question.
É uma pergunta difícil e muito grande. Pensar uma cristologia que não vai derrubar outras culturas. Então, pensar ou afirmar que Jesus iniciou uma filosofia colonizadora é razoável, mas seria uma pergunta difícil e muito grande. E, sobretudo, por causa dos resultados ou das consequências dessa afirmação a partir da experiência pessoal dela.
Can we have a Jesus who is not against all cultures, who function to legitimate the erasure of our cultures, our religion? Can we have a Jesus who comes to us and dwells with us in our cultures, in our religions, not to erase us and condemn us? That is the question we're asking. Is that in the text? Or is there another perspective of Jesus? And what can we do as the church?
Será que tem Jesus Cristo que pode ser inculturalizado, entrar na nossa cultura e não derrubar a estrutura da cultura, mas ser acolhido? E será que isso é possível? Pensar nesse tipo de cristologia de Jesus que não vai desprezar as culturas vigentes nas culturas diferentes, nos espaços geográficos também diferentes.
How can we respond as the church? I think this is a big question that you should continue to wrestle with. But the Jesus who is the only way, the truth, and the life, and no one else comes to the Father except through him. the Jesus who is the only one who has seen God, the only one who can reveal God, means that every other culture that has imagined God and other intermediaries are just relegated to nothingness. So it's our job to interrogate the different Christologies that arise from the colonized and how this particular Jesus, especially the Johannine Jesus, has functioned as a colonizing ideology, basically.
E como cristãos podemos pensar de Jesus que não seja o único revelador de Deus, que não seja o único mediador de humanidade, entre a humanidade e Deus, e que acolhe também outras culturas, outras perspectivas de santidade. Isso é uma pergunta, é desafio que a igreja, se quiser ser mais enculturada, deve agora começar a entrar nela.
Yeah. I'm not sure if I followed the last speaker, whether his was a comment or a question, but if the question was between those who use or talk about decolonial and post-colonial theories, I believe those paradigms, there are very thin differences. People who are doing post-colonial are very equally committed to decolonization, but recognizing the complex result of the contact zone and what it has created, that in as much as I, for example, characterize myself as one who would like to stand as an oppositional decolonial reader, but here I am speaking to you in English language. Why am I not speaking to you in Setswana language, which is my mother tongue? That still tells the story how I embody the powers and the structures of colonialism. So I'm a hybrid subject, So I will never really change. How many of us will be able to reclaim all our cultures? We remain, our identities are now complex and, mired by that history of colonialism. So I think both the decolonial and post-colonial theories are very useful in helping us to continue the consciousness about the structures of colonialism, their impact, how they still persist today in the liberal economy, neoliberal economy, how they are part and parcel of what we call climate change and global warming. So for me, I don't see those, theories as in opposition or in total. No, I find them as very important in keeping the consciousness of this, of the continuous structures of colonialism and how we need to think about them academically in everything that we do, theology, biblical studies, philosophy, the content of our teaching and the methods of our teaching. Yeah.
Sim, as teorias decoloniais e as teorias pós-coloniais, entre eles há fio muito fino, até pode ter entrelaçamento, porque os dois, ambos trabalham, tentam olhar os pontos de contato, né, entre os colonizados e os colonizadores. Olha, aqui ele está falando em inglês, em vez de falar em Setswana, que é a língua materna dela, que mostra que o efeito do colonialismo ainda é muito forte. O efeito é algo que pode comprovar, né, com muita facilidade. Então, como a igreja, como podemos entrar nesse discurso e olhar como trabalhar a questão de colonialismo, os frutos e os bebês que ela deixou dentro da nossa cultura, dentro do nosso pensamento. E tudo isso não é algo que é muito fácil, mas é um desafio que a gente precisa pensar.
Eu creio que podemos ainda, quem quiser fazer alguma pergunta, Juta-se. Oh, finish. It's okay for you? Okay?
Thank you very much for listening and for having me.
Ela agradece muito para estar com vocês e por vocês terem ela.
Obrigada, professora doutora Musa Dubi, por essa rica exposição e por partilhar conosco, né? E nós temos uma necessidade muito grande de assumir, eu não diria assumir, né? Mas entrar em interlocução com essas perspectivas africanas, essas epistemologias outras, essa leitura pós-colonial das mulheres teólogas africanas, que não chegou até nós ainda na academia brasileira, né? Então, também está posto o desafio, né, para a instituição FAGE, mas também para as outras do Brasil, que realmente possa facilitar o acesso à literatura, aos artigos científicos, os livros, porque a desculpa do idioma não é um problema o idioma inglês, tampouco o francês, né? Isso tem a ver com o eurocentrismo das academias brasileiras, que privilegia o eixo Europa e Estados Unidos, e, evidentemente, a teologia patriarcal. Quem sabe, né, a gente começa a trazer os livros, tem alguns aqui expostos, e criar um movimento de descolonização ou leitura pós-colonial, né, da Bíblia e da teologia. Quero muito agradecer todas que estão aqui e todos, uma grande honra estarmos reunidos, marcando, quem sabe, uma virada de tempo, né? Uma nova temporalidade para a teologia no Brasil. E para encerrar, né, nós somos afrodescendentes, nós vamos encerrar a maneira melhor que nós podemos fazer. Muito obrigada, pastora Val. Eu não posso perder essa oportunidade de compartilhar com vocês aqui, né, Teologia Feminista Negra, Vozes que Ecoam da África e da América Latina. É o livro que eu organizei, foi publicado pela editora Vozes, final do ano de 2023. E a Voz está aqui conosco nesse evento, está patrocinando, de alguma maneira, a minha vinda para Belo Horizonte. Ela está nos apoiando. E esse é um marco também na teologia brasileira, né? Um livro que eu organizei e editei da interlocução das teólogas negras da América Latina e algumas teólogas africanas do Congo, da Nigéria, de Moçambique. Eu creio que é isso. Congo, Nigéria, Moçambique. Então, foi o nosso primeiro trabalho de conexão com o continente africano. E, a partir disso, nasceu essas outras conexões que eu tenho feito com o continente africano, com os teólogos africanos, a teologia africana produzida pelos homens, foi o meu primeiro contato, os homens mais ligados ao catolicismo, de língua francesa e inglesa, e depois eu tenho me conectado com as teólogas africanas. É um projeto político epistêmico e que nós temos desenvolvido, ensaiando, né, uma teologia decolonial e contra-colonial. Então, quem tem interesse nessa primeira obra nossa, assim, conhecer um pouco a teologia das mulheres africanas, está ali, né, uma oportunidade, e eu posso autografar para quem desejar. E a pastora Val também, né, tem um presente para a nossa querida professora Musa Dube.
Esse livro é o relatório da verdade sobre a escravidão negra no Distrito Federal e em torno. Eu tive a honra de participar dele como consultora em educação. Até esse livro, em 2017, a academia defendia que o Distrito Federal nunca teve quilombo. Então, nós visitamos 9 quilombos do DF e do entorno 3 vezes. A primeira vez para ouvi-los, criança, adolescente, jovem, adulto, idoso. Voltamos para Brasília e escrevemos. Depois retornamos ao quilombo para apresentar para eles o que nós tínhamos escrito, para que eles verificassem se era aquilo mesmo ou se precisaria incluir, excluir alguma coisa. Voltamos para Brasília, fizemos os ajustes e lançamos esse livro na Câmara dos Deputados, no Sindicato dos Bancários de Brasília, que foi quem financiou a pesquisa, e descobrimos que o quilombo Mesquita é um quilombo do Distrito Federal e deixamos indícios de no mínimo mais 3 quilombos. São Sebastião, Fercal e Paranoá, para continuarmos a pesquisa. Então, eu trouxe esse livro, ele está com uma dedicatória, e eu agradeço à pastora Thalita, eu sempre confundo com a Priscila, a pastora Thalita, que traduziu a dedicatória, e vamos entregar à professora doutora Musa esse exemplar para que ela inclua em suas leituras, estudos, pesquisas, porque esse trabalho é um trabalho de resultado de luta, resistência, sobrevivência do movimento social negro do Distrito Federal e em torno. Para quem não sabe o que é quilombo, quilombo são comunidades remanescentes de escravizadas e escravizados, escravizades, que fugiam das senzalas, onde eram acorrentadas, acorrentados, acorrentades, e se juntavam, se aquilombavam para se fortalecerem no sentido de acabar com a escravização no Brasil. Quem quiser ter acesso, entra no link do Sindicato dos Bancários, que lá tem o livro em PDF. Então, eu queria que ela se levantasse aqui para nós entregarmos, registrarmos com uma foto, né, esse livro que nós entregamos com muito carinho para ela.
Thank you so much. We are looking for these bridges between the sisters in the diaspora. This is the second time I come to Brazil to try and build bridges with Afro-Brazilian women. We hear that Brazil has the highest number of African diaspora, but we hardly hear their voices. So I'm very, very thankful for this book. And I hope that we will continue to build bridges between ourselves. Thank you, Closer, and everyone else.
Ela está muito feliz por receber esse presente do livro e também está ciente que o Brasil é o maior país que tem muitos afro-diasporas. E esse aqui é um privilégio ter contato com vocês e ter um presente dos afro-diasporas. E falou que thank you very much, muito, muito obrigado.
Obrigada, Choco, por nos ajudar. Mais uma vez, obrigada, pastora Val. Obrigada, mãe Vilma. Obrigada, Musa Dubi. Obrigada ao suporte também, Nájila, por todo o apoio. E vamos ficar em pé, então, para encerrar a moda afro-brasileira, africana. Mais que afro-brasileira, a moda africana. Nós vamos tocar... Cedric, please, venham tocar para nós mais uma música. E vamos, aí eu quero aproveitar e nós vamos tirar uma foto oficial aqui, aproveitar, né, para um momento histórico. Eles vão tocar para a gente. Eu queria pedir uma música bem animada, bem africana, né, para a gente. Pode ser.
Nyokamsango yererea nyokamsango yererea nyokamsango. Tchau para todos nós. Vamos cantar yererea nyokamsango yererea nyokamsango
Yerere nyokamsango vanambuya
yererea nyokamsango
vanambuya
yererea nyokamsango
nyokamsango
yererea nyokamsango
vanambuya
yererea nyokamsango
vanambuya
yererea nyokamsango
vanambuya
yererea nyokamsango
nyokamsango
yererea nyokamsango
vanambuya
yererea nyokamsango
vanababa
yererea nyokamsango
nyokamsango
yererea Yo kamsango.
Bana baba we.
Hey.
Nyoka msango.
Yo kamsango.
Nyoka msango.
Hey.
Nyoka msango.
Yo msango.
Nyoka msango.
Hey.
Nyoka msango.
Yo kamsango.
Nyoka msango.
Hey.
Nyoka msango.
Yo kamsango.
Nyoka msango.
Hey.
Nyoka msango.
Yo kamsango. Agora para caminho, vamos cantar uma música católica, Maria de Nazaré. Eu acho que todo mundo de nós conhece a música. Oh, você dá uma Maria de Nazaré? Tá de Buda.
Ei. Boa noite, boa noite, boa noite. Vou fazer do jeito que eu aprendi, ok? É uma... Ficar mais daqui, né, meu irmão? É um cântico para Xangô. Xangô. Ok? Xangô. Olucoso. Abijawara inolenu. Oruori oya obakusu. Mapami. Inolenu inoloju. Obakusu. Baba bapami. Baba bapami. Xangô de mim. Em Iopa Xangô lá de mo. Xangô, Olucoso, Abijawara, Kinolenu, Oruo.